Imagine standing in the middle of a dusty, ancient road, watching an ordinary man suddenly do something that breaks every rule of biology, physics, and probability. No special effects, no mythology, just a human being in real history, performing an act so far beyond natural limits that even modern science struggles to categorize it. The Bible is filled with these moments, not as legends, but as eyewitness accounts. And what makes them even more fascinating is that the biblical writers never describe these feats as magic. They describe them as empowerment, a sudden surge of ability attributed to something they called the Spirit of the Lord. But here's where the mystery deepens. When you compare these ancient accounts with modern scientific research on extreme human performance, neurochemistry, biomechanics, and historical warfare, the gap between miracle and unknown human potential becomes far more intriguing than most people realize. These stories aren't about superheroes. They're about what happens when divine purpose intersects with human limitation. To understand these biblical feats, we need to start with what science actually says about the limits of the human body, and how those limits can be shattered under the right conditions. Over the last decade, researchers have documented rare events where humans exhibit strength increases of several 100% during moments of extreme danger. This isn't just adrenaline, it's a neurological override where the brain temporarily lifts the safety mechanisms that normally prevent us from injuring ourselves. In everyday life, your body only allows you to use a fraction of your true strength. But in a life or death moment, those governors can be bypassed. The Bible describes something strikingly similar in the story of Samson. When the text says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, the Hebrew verb used implies a sudden, overwhelming surge of energy. It's not describing a man who was permanently superhuman. It's describing a man who experienced temporary, explosive empowerment. And the details matter. When Samson breaks the ropes binding him, the text says they became like flax that had caught fire. That's not a description of brute force. It's a metaphor of energy release, a state change happening inside him. Modern neuroscience adds another layer. Under extreme conditions, the brain can enter a hyper-focused state where time seems to slow down, reaction speed increases, and sensory processing becomes incredibly sharp. This is documented in soldiers, athletes, and survivors of traumatic events, and it aligns with the biblical account of Elijah outrunning a royal chariot. A chariot could reach the speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour. For Elijah to outrun it, even for a short distance, his stride frequency, oxygen uptake, and muscular endurance would need to exceed the world's greatest marathoners by a factor of 2. The text doesn't describe this as metaphor. It describes it as empowerment. Archaeology adds even more context. Studies of ancient Near Eastern warfare reveal that elite warriors could generate lethal force with weapons that modern athletes struggle to control. Bronze Age spears, iron swords, and heavy shields required immense strength and endurance. Yet the Bible describes individuals who exceed even these elite benchmarks. David's mighty men fought against overwhelming odds with endurance that borders on the impossible. One man fights until his hand freezes to the sword, a real medical condition where muscles lock under extreme stress. The text is describing real physiology, not fantasy. Across the Hebrew Bible, the phrase "Spirit of the Lord" appears in contexts of sudden strength, prophetic clarity, supernatural courage, enhanced endurance, and decisive leadership. It's never described as magic. It's described as divine empowerment of human faculties. And the pattern is consistent. The empowerment is temporary, purposeful, and tied to a specific moment. Let's look deeper at Samson. Most people imagine him as a mythic strongman, But the text presents him differently. His strength is episodic. It comes and goes. The Spirit rushes upon him at specific moments, and the language used suggests a temporary state of heightened ability. When he kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, the text emphasizes that the Spirit empowered him for that moment. And when the Spirit departs, Samson becomes as vulnerable as any other man. His story isn't about a superhuman. It's about a human empowered for a divine purpose. Elijah's story is equally compelling. The account of him running ahead of Ahab's chariot is often dismissed as poetic exaggeration, but the language used is technical. The hand of the Lord is a phrase used elsewhere to describe divine intervention that amplifies human ability. Elijah wasn't a trained athlete. He was a prophet, likely in his 60s. Yet he performs a feat that would challenge the greatest runners in history. The text isn't describing a metaphor. It's describing a moment where divine empowerment intersects with human action. David's mighty men offer another window into this phenomenon. These were warriors who performed feats that defy fatigue, weapon weight, enemy numbers, and battlefield physics. One man defends a field alone against an entire Philistine formation. Another kills hundreds in a single engagement. These aren't exaggerations. They're descriptions of warriors who experienced moments of extraordinary empowerment. And the text consistently attributes their feats to the Spirit of the Lord. When you look deeper into the biblical language, patterns emerge. The phrase, "Spirit of the Lord came upon," follows a consistent formula. Sudden empowerment, a specific task, a temporary state, and a return to normal. This mirrors what neuroscientists call transient hyperperformance states. Even the numbers associated with mighty men, 300, 800, 1,000, match ancient military unit sizes. These men weren't fighting hundreds of individuals one by one. They were breaking entire formations, which is even more impressive. Archaeology reinforces this. Excavations at major biblical sites reveal weapons and armor that required immense strength to wield effectively. Yet the biblical heroes handled them with ease, and ancient Jewish writers didn't treat these stories as myth. They saw them as examples of divine empowerment, not superpowers. The book of Ben Sirah describes Elijah as a man whose words burned like fire, emphasizing empowerment rather than biology. History gives us real-world parallels. At the Battle of Thermopylae, Greek records describe warriors performing feats that modern historians once dismissed as exaggeration, until biomechanics studies showed they were plausible under extreme adrenaline, trained muscle memory, and life or death stakes. One Spartan reportedly fought until his weapon broke, then continued with his hands. This mirrors biblical descriptions of Eleazar fighting until his hand froze, Shammah defending a field alone, and Samson breaking bonds like burned flax. Ancient warfare produced moments that look superhuman, and the Bible attributes these moments to divine empowerment. Skeptics raise fair objections. Some argue these stories are exaggerations, but the biblical accounts are unusually restrained and consistent across manuscripts. Others claim humans can't exceed physical limits, yet modern science documents cases where people temporarily exceed strength and speed limits by several 100%. And the idea that miracles violate physics misunderstands both miracles and physics. Miracles don't violate physical laws. They operate beyond our current understanding of them. Quantum mechanics alone has rewritten what we consider possible multiple times in the last century. The deeper meaning behind these stories is not that humans can become superhuman. The message is that when God empowers someone, the impossible becomes possible. Not because the human is extraordinary, but because the source is. Every biblical miracle becomes a partnership. Divine power working through human vessels. These stories are not about human greatness. They're about divine purpose, expressed through human action. When you look at Samson, Elijah, David's mighty men, and countless others, the pattern is unmistakable. Ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things when empowered for a specific moment, a specific mission, and a specific purpose. And that same theme runs through the entire biblical narrative. God doesn't choose the strongest, the fastest, or the most capable. He empowers the willing, the faithful, and the available. If this exploration shifted how you see Scripture, reflect on what stood out most. Does the evidence strengthen your faith, or does it raise new questions worth exploring? Share it with someone who loves asking hard questions, and keep digging into the mysteries where faith and science meet. There's far more waiting beneath the surface.